For generations, learning a trade meant watching the Journeyperson, measuring twice, cutting once, and learning to trust the feel of the tool in your hand. That foundation hasn't changed, but the scaffolding around how we access knowledge has. This isn't a distant automated future. They are meeting AI this week, while studying for a Red Seal exam, calculating a curved line on site, working through math homework with a chatbot, opening another tab or an app. Which raises the quieter, more interesting question. What happens when the answer sounds completely certain and it's wrong? Who notices? And what does it take to teach someone to notice for themselves? This is AI Bytes, where we look past the tech hype to understand what AI is actually doing to how adults learn, real classroom, through experiences, and the everyday moments that shape learning. In this episode, we talk with Corey Chambers of LiUNA Local 1059 in London, Ontario. And what comes out of the conversation isn't fear, and it isn't blind trust either. It's something more interesting. It's the honest middle ground. People discovering in real time where a tool feels trustworthy and where it still falls short. Welcome to the AI Bytes podcast. AI is shifting the landscape beneath our feet, and staying oriented can feel quite overwhelming. We built this space to change that. In every edition, we look beyond the tech headlines to connect the dots between AI, adult education, and its broader systemic impacts. Hello, I'm Carolina Cohoon, EdTech consultant and co-author of this curated resource, now in its third year. And today, we're turning our focus to the apprenticeship sector. If you work in the trades, you probably heard the question, are the robots coming for our jobs? And honestly, it's not an unreasonable thing to wonder. The labor market is shifting, and what journey people need to know is evolving right alongside it. But today, we're moving past that question. We're talking about something that is already happening right now. How AI is changing what it actually means to learn a trade. It's changing how apprenticeships search for information, who they trust, and how they make critical judgment calls in the field. And critically, we need to talk about what happens when an AI-generated answer sounds completely confident, but is flat out wrong. Because apprentices are not waiting for some distant future. They are meeting it today. They see it when they search for a repair procedure and get an AI summary, when they troubleshoot equipment with a chatbot, or when they follow a training material that was AI written. Even the site manager scheduling tools might be quietly running on an algorithm in the background. And that's exactly what we're unpacking today. And I couldn't think of better people to do it with. I'm joined today by my co-host, Jeremy Marks, and our guest, Corey Chambers. It's great to have you here. Before we dive into the deep end on the apprenticeship sector, why don't you, Corey, take a moment to introduce yourself to our listeners?
Thanks, Carolina. I'm Corey Chambers. I do curriculum development and support for the Labourers Union Training Centre at 1059 in London, Ontario. I've been a trainer for most of my career as an apprentice. For about 20 years now, I've helped with the sewer and water specialty sector construction craft worker apprentices. And for about the last 5 years, I have worked specifically a little bit more heavily as a member of the operations team here doing curriculum development and support.
Well, Corey, we're really delighted to have you here. And as you can imagine, we have a lot of questions to ask you. And I'd like to start with really the basic one, which is where have you seen AI show up in your trade and specifically in the instructional work that you are doing here at LiUNA 1059?
Where probably the most prominent place that we've seen AI show up like in the training center, is in apprentices using it as a study tool while they prepare themselves for their Red Seal exam. There was kind of a directive that come from some of the folks that run the place to let us know that they didn't want us uploading proprietary material, copyrighted material of ours that had been developed over years into large language models, just worrying about it becoming public domain and getting loose out in the space. And then it come to find out during one of our exam prep weeks that a group of students had been trying to use the AI to help them study, and realized right away that it was going to be a bit of trouble if we sort of let it go. So had a real quick emergency meeting and talked with everybody about it, and we come to the conclusion that really what we needed to do at that moment was have a discussion with all the students about how to properly prompt it, so that if they say, hey, no matter what one they're using, give me 30 questions on scaffolding. Well, the difficulty there being that they don't know if they're getting scaffolding questions based on Australian rules or South Korean rules or Japanese rules or from the UK or from the US. So just that they had to be specific to say, like, okay, AI, I am studying for my Red Seal exam in London, Ontario, for my construction craft worker 450A exam. I need questions that pertain to my logbook on scaffolding. And that sort of puts the guardrails around the AI to say, okay, specifically this person needs questions that are relevant to that area, that they're going to get the right answers to those questions, and helps them. And a few of them seem to find it very useful to use that tool to study with.
Did you find that that's a way, on the one hand, of providing them with much needed guidance, but on the other hand, still protect the proprietary curriculum that 1059 is using?
Yeah, like mostly that it focuses on looking at the logbook, which is widely available online. Anybody can search it up and see what goes into a construction craft worker's logbook. And then it just also referencing safety rules and laws and regulations and guidelines from this area, and marrying the two of those things together, the AI can put together relevant questions that could very well be asked on a local Red Seal test that pertains to Canada.
Now, I can imagine, because it's a form of test preparation, it's not, and I'm making an assumption here, but not terribly surprising, that you would have some people who, in the process of preparing for an exam, would turn to AI as a way of helping them. But has it come up before over the past few years since AI has entered into the landscape, where you found out that there are folks who are preparing for their exams, or even just trying to master math, for example, in the pre-app process, who are turning to AI for this assistance?
Yeah, I mean, the math component of it has only come up just recently, and have had some students, even in the last couple months, that have had a little struggle with certain types of math or certain commonly used mathematics, and where a lot of them, not so much in studying to learn how to use it, but there's a lot of them that are utilizing the AI to perform those math functions for them, putting it to work for them. I have pushed several of those students to, let's not just count on the AI to give us the answers here. If you want it to give you some questions to brush up, let's do that. But let's not just count on it totally understanding what it is that you're trying to do with the math.
Corey, I love what you're doing. It's giving adults agency. And I think that is important, because when you build instructions, when you deliver instructions, you're just creating followers. But when you're giving them authority to make that judgment, you're building leaders.
Yeah, we've had a really high proponent of people that come out of this course that wind up in positions of trust or important positions at work, either become foremen or lead hands or drain layers in the case of, say, my sewer and water class. They all hold key positions at the companies they work for.
To that point, I'm curious, again, because of what you're saying and Carolina's point about making sure that the learners, the pre-apprentices and apprentices, have agency. How do you think that your approach to AI, as it has evolved, has been another component in creating leaders who are coming out of your program?
Well, that they understand how to set those prompts, how to set the guardrails on the information that they're trying to gather. Just in being able to understand that, I feel like it puts them in a better seat than somebody who just goes and blindly asks the AI questions without understanding that there's a risk to getting misinformation or having an AI, what do they call that, hallucinate
Yeah.
an AI hallucination of the correct information, but just pulling the right information in the wrong context. But then having them understand how to properly prompt the thing is like paramount importance for them to be using it. One of the nicest things that I've found, or that the feedback that I've got from several of them with the using the AI to study, is that they can get immediate feedback and correction where they get it. They can ask it to, we've also had them inject the prompt to have the AI mark their responses as they're answering the questions, and then provide them with other questions to focus their efforts on what seems to be their weaker areas of expertise as they're going through a particular subject, so that it can prompt follow-up work. They can prompt it to build follow-up questions to help them continue to study. But they can also ask it to provide them explanations or background information on like where to look up an answer on something, which, like from a leadership role, if you are on site, you ask the AI, hey, what are the rules surrounding me setting up this excavation? What do I need to do? But then if it can also refer you out to like, where's a guideline? Where can I find a guideline for this? Where can I find the safe excavation guidelines or guidelines for working in the vicinity of underground infrastructure? If they can get pointed at where the source was for that, it just saves them time having to go and dig around online looking it up.
So is it fair to say then that one of the things that you're now teaching them, because of the way you're incorporating AI, is that you're teaching them how to prompt, and you're really teaching them how to prompt in a very professional way, specifically geared towards not only their sector, but also building off of the very specific training that they're receiving right here at the training center?
Yeah, like when they go through a legislation course here, they'll understand what the Canadian regulations, what the Ontario legislation says, well, the construction regulations. So even being able to point the AI, like, can you tell me what it says in Ontario Regulation 21391 about this situation? Like, you're referring it to a very specific piece of legislation that's widely available online. And if there's other, you can also start to ask it, is there any other related documents that, like from the Ontario Center for the Ontario Center for the Health of OHCOW, if you ask it to, what can you tell me about this organization and its recommendations for being in the heat? That makes them a little more effective as supervisors.
Well, one follow-up to that, I find that really fascinating, because one of the things I'm wondering as well, especially since, Carolina, you raised the question of leadership, is that do you think that AI has actually encouraged not only you and other instructors, but also the folks who are coming through trade school to actually engage more with the law, because of the fact that AI is now requiring them to have a greater literacy about regulations and law in order to use that tool effectively? Whereas obviously health and safety, following laws, protocols has always been important and will remain important. But that what you're finding is people are now actually having to engage with some of the finer points of rules and regulations in order to use the AI properly and effectively.
I'm not sure that I've seen like an increase in the engagement with having to learn legislation and things like this. I just think that it takes some of our learners that might have had difficulties in the past, perhaps like in interpreting some of those laws or spending the time interpreting it, rather than having to dig through it all. It aids in their research, that it sort of streamlines that they can ask the AI about the rule. The AI can tell them, read this, like this clause, this subsection. Like it can point them right at the one that they're trying to find.
And are you finding that that actually is an enhancement, that the AI can be used in a way, especially when you're talking about legislation, where a person who might be overwhelmed, let's say,
yes,
by the full body of legislation, the AI is a really good guide, a really good assistant, a good assistant in terms of helping them zero in on what's particularly pertinent to what they're doing?
Yeah, I think that it specifically avoids that fatigue for folks that have a very low tolerance for doing a lot of dry reading.
Sure.
That's a lot of text actually to browse. So it's fantastic that they're using the tool. They're working with the tool. They're learning with the tool as well, right? I do have a question about that. You have newcomers. And have you seen instances in which newcomers have been translating some of those guidelines?
Yes, oh, definitely. We've had several students from several parts of the world that we've got set up and used Google Translate in the classroom, with the camera looking at their textbook, with the iPad looking at the slideshow that we have up at the front of the class and translating it into their language that they understand. Now, as far as how much, like I assume that there is some artificial intelligence behind those translation tools, but how much specific, like actual just point blank going to the AI to ask it for a translation of that, I don't know how much I've seen, but I assume that it's a component of the translators that they're using. I have had several students that have come through. We've used Deep to translate back and forth the speed of conversation. I would say something into my phone translating into Ukrainian, and they're using their phones to say something in Ukrainian and the phone to give it to me in English. Like we're having a conversation back and forth that way.
I've even had a little bit of experience with that too, because a number of years ago, there were more Ukrainian free apprentices coming through, as well as a number of Arabic speakers, where many times when I would talk to them, they would look at me and say, I'm not sure what you said. Can you talk into the phone? Or can you show me something on paper and then I will run it through my phone? And it really was a significant enhancement because we were able to communicate that much more clearly. Certainly was a stress reducer, I think, in particular for the pre-apprentice I was talking to, because they knew that they weren't going to miss an important element of the questions that I was asking. So I'm curious, connected with this as well, because one of the things that often comes up in conversations in educational settings is the question, how can you tell if a learner has used AI? And so there's been all these conversations about, well, I noticed that their writing has changed, right? That there's a tone or a style in their writing that is different from what I was witnessing before that person or that learner started using it. But from what you're describing, again, if I understand you correctly, is that this isn't really like that. This is, you're finding out that people are turning to AI as, an enhancement tool, let's say in math, to help them better understand something. So it's not like it's a secret, or it's not like somebody suddenly shows up in a math booster class and suddenly understands math or can start teaching the class, let's say, in a way, whereas they couldn't before. But that, if I understand you correctly, what you're noticing is that AI is really being brought in not because a person wants to, let's say, appear more knowledgeable, but they're being rather open about the fact that, well, I'm just bringing in this additional tool because it is really helping me master a number of the things that you are asking me to do. Is that characterization correct?
Yeah, in a lot of places, there is still room for, I shouldn't say there's still room, but there are still some that are utilizing it for doing complex calculations while they're in the middle of full-scale hands-on practical. A lot of what we do, I think that we would see a lot more of that if there was more of a theoretical or an academic component to what we do at trade school, but most of the focus of our theory lessons is to be the shortest path to full-size hands-on practicals. They spend a lot of time, we'll teach a few things in class. Maybe we show them how to calculate a hypotenuse to square off the inside of a structure, and they need to do conversions between, say, imperial and metric. And then when we go out in the shop to actually perform a project, they're looking to their phone to perform those calculations. And sometimes if they really don't understand it, they're just straight up asking, for the most part, the AI in their phone to perform these calculations for them. If I have this measurement by this measurement, what's the hypotenuse? Can you convert that to feet and inches? There has been several occasions where that's happened in class, and we've caught on to the fact, okay, why is your project smaller than these others? Or why does it look different? Why is it's not squared up to where the baseline that these other projects are squared up to that your classmates are doing? Why is that? Well, I asked, I didn't actually do the math. I just asked and either misspoke, or you start looking back through their phone, okay, show me the calculations that it did.
Well, I'm curious to this as well, because one of the things that I've certainly seen in a variety of different learning environments, academic and otherwise, there's often this debate about whether or not AI should even be allowed into the classroom environment, even though we know it comes in anyway, or fear about the fact that it is going to create a series of misconceptions in learners that are going to lead them astray. And I'm wondering, based on what you just said about how when it comes to theory, your goal is to try to get them to the practical applied approach as quickly as you can. Do you find that that method of teaching also lends itself to, let's say, preventing a person from getting further down the road in terms of using AI and developing a series of misconceptions about principles? Because you're intervening very quickly. You're getting people into the field very quickly.
Yeah, one of the biggest parts about the structure and the model that we use for even our theory portions of our classes really focus on activity-based adult learning, where we're not just conveying information to them and having them do a thing. We're like spending a lot of time. Anytime we want them to interact with information, there's either a video or a reading or a presentation or a short lecture that's usually followed by some manner of activity where they're performing some kind of function with that information now, reorganizing it, listing it, putting steps in order, that the focus is on the information and the activity, which doesn't really provide a lot of opportunity for them to pull an AI into the situation. They're not very often consulting their tablets, their phones. It's that we've given them a specific task to do with that information, and they perform that in class, and then we're usually off to practical.
So again, from an instructional method standpoint, it sounds like because of the instructional design work that you've done here, there right now is a lower risk that somebody is going to lead themselves astray by having more of a dialogue, so to speak, with AI than they are having with their instructors as well as their peers.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, it's a lot of it's peer focused, making sure that they're setting themselves up in different patterns in the classroom, that it's pair work or it's a small group work. So there's occasions where we've had them come up with small presentations. And when we do, say, an activity like that, you'll occasionally see them looking to generate an image or something for their slideshows. But generally speaking, we've also, over the last little while, instituted a policy in building to keep everybody off of their personal devices. When you're in class, your phone comes out and it's at the front of your desk, and it's not to be touched or walked out of the room with. And the focus in the classroom is on that information and on each other, rather than having anybody dive off into their phone.
I'm curious as well, because it sounds, again, based on this instructional design, this model that you're working with, AI has not yet, or even doesn't have to play what would be the word I would use? It's not interfering, right? It doesn't yet seem to be, or hopefully not even ever, causing chaos or causing a significant amount of disruption in the learning process. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say that's fair to say. We're fairly specific in the things that we're teaching. So there's not a lot of room for interpretation as such. It's not as though they're having to digest a huge amount of information, then interpret it and give it back to us in a different way. That could be swayed by what they're doing with an AI.
So on the flip side of that, if you're looking at it again, your standpoint, how much of an influence do you feel, not just in your own work, but even just in a broader sense, what you're getting here within the training center, how much of an influence do you feel that AI, and to be very specific about AI, let's say chatbots, large language models, how much of an influence do you feel that is actually having on instructional practice, on curriculum design, or is it still fairly minimal?
I think it's fairly minimal. I think where you're starting to see it pop up a little bit more is in research. When people are looking into a topic and they start, if I want to build a course on operating tractor backhoes, I can ask my AI, hey, what can you tell me about the rules for operating tractor backhoes where I live? Like, where are they used? Who's the largest manufacturer of these in my area? The things that you would spend a lot of time digging around online, trying to find sources for information, that it can very quickly provide you with a whole bunch of information that then you just need to look at the footnotes of where it obtained that information. And you can very easily go to those places to look for those things for yourself once you find out where the footnoted sources are from.
So it sounds like what you're saying as well is that in that particular case, the instructor, let's say the hypothetical instructor, is using the AI for very specific details, but that they're still relying on their expertise. In other words, they're not just going to AI and saying, I don't know anything about this topic, just give me everything you can. It sounds like what you're talking about is it's a time saver, but also it can provide a person a lot of very location-specific details and save them a lot of time in gathering that information while not supplanting that instructor's expertise in terms of how they know they need to design that course.
Yeah, like even from my personal experience, anything that I use it for research, like always take it with a grain of salt that there's a good possibility that what it's telling me is wrong, and that I'm going to vet that information. I'm going to look at where it obtained that information, and then I'm going to go and look at those sources myself. Anytime that I have a chance to vet anything with other instructors or other subject matter experts on a particular topic as well, from a curriculum development standpoint, realizing that I am not an expert in all the things that I'm building courses for, but I'm going to work with experts but always the default to those experts, no matter what it is that I've researched, to take it back to them to say, like, is this reasonable? Is this something that you would do in your day-to-day?
It sounds like that's an advantage of the training center as well, is that when you have all these different sectorial experts that are all in the same building, that there's also a culture where you know that if you've gained additional information using AI, you know that you have a colleague you can go to and say, okay, here's the information that I've collected, but you're the expert. Take a look at this. Is this accurate or not?
Mm-hmm. The biggest advantage for the research end of it is the time saving of the hours of combing the internet that an AI can do in minutes.
That's amazing. I'm just thinking and starting to connect some of those dots that we are writing about on AI12, about the series of learning and how beautifully, Corey, this is integrated between the series of learning of cognitivism and constructivism. We're talking about cognitivism, building that schema, building that memory through practice, and constructivism with all these networks and what you do with information.
I think it's such a good reminder that we don't design in isolation, and we design in conversation, and those conversations are where the learning actually happens for us and for the people we're building for.
Well, I think one of the things that makes this, for me, a very interesting conversation is that a lot of times in the get set system, when you've got programs that are taking in learners who haven't yet landed in a destination like LiUNA, who are interested in going into apprenticeship or have specific pathways in mind. Oftentimes when they're working with instructors, that instructor is, in the best sense, learning with that individual, trying to figure out how can I help this person be prepared if they want to apply to LiUNA, for example. And so their expertise, of course, is in working with adult learners, but they have a very generalized expertise in terms of helping that person with math, with reading or writing, digital skills, etc. And so one of the challenges that they have with that is they know their fields, they know their disciplines really well, but when it comes to something like construction, that's not their area of expertise. Whereas if that learner comes here, then they're in an environment where the type of learning they're doing is highly specific, as you've been describing, right? Highly specific, not only to becoming a red seal construction worker, but then further specialized to the specific sector that they're in. And so it almost seems to me like one of the advantages that you have here is that this is not unlike a college in that each sector is its own department. And so not just among the pre-apprentices and apprentices, but also among the different instructors, they get to confer with one another. They get to go to the person who has a specific sector-based expertise. And then there's less of a risk, as we've been talking about, a person turning to AI rather than an expert and letting AI create illusions or hallucinations for them. Whereas in this environment, the expectation is, both in terms of the relationships that exist here, but also in terms of the instructional design, that you always go to a person first.
Yes. As soon as you have come across a path of information and, looked at those citations or asked the AI where it got this information and gone and how to look at the source, to then go and find out from a subject matter expert on a particular subject, is this industry standard? Is this industry practice in our area? Is this something that we're doing? Is this valid? Is this thing that we're looking at, is this thing that I would like to say about this valid?
Corey, I have a follow-up question to that. Do you have any learners who fear AI? Like some of them, they may be using it, but have you found any learners that are not very comfortable and they don't feel that verification is even enough?
We do get the occasional conspiracy-minded individual, and the AI is also one of those things that if the sky is falling, it's going to be the end of the world. It's going to get us all. It's going to do away with all our jobs. The type of jobs that we do has been said even by our apprentices several times. There's no way that AI is going to go run a shovel to find locates to make it safe for us to run an excavator past a gas line. There's no way AI is doing that. We're fairly safe in the laboring work that we do.
You're showing us some of the productive ways of using AI.
All these folks that talk about dangerous AI is going to be, it seems to me like if we shut the water off, it's done for.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And if you work in the utility sector, you have an advantage in that regard. I just think that what I find really interesting about both of your observations is that it seems to me that part of what might be missing, let's say, from the AI conversation is this critical element of context, which you were both talking about, which is that we've been spending a lot of time talking about the instructional model here and how that really does lend itself in some cases to a person, a pre-apprentice or an apprentice, bringing in AI as a tool that might help them with their learning, but that they have scaffolding around that. They have people in this learning environment who are guiding them at the same time, saying, yes, if this tool is beneficial to you to help you clarify your own learning process, fine, not a problem. We're going to help you further clarify your learning process because we're going to show you what the appropriate guidelines are in terms of its use, that you need to understand that if you're trying to solve a particular problem, you need to know that there are very specific Ontario guidelines. You need to understand there are specific guidelines or specific mathematical concepts you have to use to do this job properly. And so you can intervene with those people fairly quickly. Whereas I would imagine if somebody was, let's say, on the other end, trying to imagine what kind of math or what kinds of things they needed to know how to do to pass the initial math assessment that you do here, they might be much more frightened because they have no particular appreciation or context for how you're going to show them the way in which these mathematical principles work.
Oh, I think so.
Tell us a bit. Noticed AI is actually being used in the field on job sites.
Like, aside from people just using it to do simple math calculations that they don't trust themselves with, where I have heard people utilizing it is in doing things like a takeoff. Have a look at these drawings. How much dirt do I have to move? The 5th floor of this apartment building. What's my rebar list? And that it can really accurately and repeatably pull that information out of a pretty complex set of files. Most of the building drawings nowadays are all completely in digital, which makes it pretty easy for an AI to interact with and pull information from. Even asking it to provide coordinates for like northing and eastern coordinates for layout, and if I need to extend this line this way, it's fairly complex mathematical calculation that not a lot of inexperienced people will be able to do. But can you provide me coordinates to extend this curb on this tangent another 150 meters? Can you give me the coordinates for that? It's something that it can do fairly easily.
Well, it sounds, and I connect this to some of the things we were talking about a little while ago, it also sounds like one of the really interesting aspects of the use of AI for apprentices specifically is that it's requiring them to know how to do two things simultaneously. One, like you were saying, when they're studying for their Red Seal exam, there are going to be some things that are, let's say, Ontario specific that they're going to need to know. But simultaneously, they're also learning how to use AI in a broader, let's call it national context, which is that because it is a technology that is portable, it is a technology that can be utilized from any part of the country, they also simultaneously need to know how to use that technology in a very context-specific situation, not just the type of work site that they are on, but what rules and regulations apply to that work site based on where in the country they are located. Correct as well.
When they start asking questions about something that they're studying for their Red Seal exam, they need to know that what they're studying has to be interprovincial. So if they start asking, like, what height do I need to be tied off at? What's the most stringent standard across Canada? Or the fact that we're actually working, they're doing the physical hands-on, on-site portion of their apprenticeship, like in the field. That work is going to take place in Ontario, so they need to know the rules and regulations for the locality in which they work.
I guess kind of the two questions that I will ask you in closing, which are both, of course, deeply connected to one another, is, are there instances where you have seen AI really help a learner overcome an obstacle, really help them succeed, where you've noticed that their use of AI has really helped them master a particular problem or help them really grasp a concept that they were otherwise struggling to be able to grasp?
Yeah, I had a particular group of learners that were very intensely interested in calculating grades along vertical curves, which it's small potatoes for somebody who's gone through a university math program, but for a lot of our guys, it's pretty high level mathematics. And they were using it to generate examples like, can you give me an entering and an exiting grade from this curve, from a crest curve or a side curve? Then they were using that example that it would generate to do their own calculations, which then they would put back into the AI to get it to mark them. And they just felt like it was something that they got a chance to get some extra practice on that didn't take away from the rest of the class, while we're taking some of our more struggling learners, bring them up to speed, and those guys had a chance to race ahead with a couple things and didn't interfere with the class as much, which was very useful.
So it sounds like it was, for the case of those who got to experiment with the AI, it was a very highly contextualized and appropriate use of the AI technology within that learning environment.
Yeah, very specific application.
And then I guess the final question, the flip side of that would be, have you at any point noticed AI or the use of AI creating more problems for an individual as opposed to helping them solve problems more quickly?
I can't say that I have seen any real big struggles that have been created through the use of it. There has been the occasional, it's much harder to correct misinformation after it has settled into somebody's mind than it is to just show them the right way the first time. So, there has been the odd case of that where somebody has got a fact or a figure and sworn by it. And when you really prompt them as to where they dug it up, well, I wound up asking the AI on my phone, and this is what it told me. Well, why would you trust that over this trade textbook says or what we've learned in class?
So it sounds like, again, because of the instructional design model you've got, you're still catching those errors relatively quickly.
Yeah, they don't seem to have too many get past the goalie.
Deal with some diversity of perspectives as well, based on what is fed in the data with AI. Jeremy and we're actually having a conversation about this with our AI group. We used to meet with other professionals from the technology industry, and we were having a discussion specifically about automation versus AI. What is an automation? What is AI? And something that personally I discovered is that when you go on the chatbot, there are different perspectives of what actually is an automation. So I think that easily translates into that, Corey, and the importance of talking to other people. And so it's not only the verification through citation, but it's also verifying with subject matter experts, which is what you're doing.
Yeah, I would only add, I agree completely. And I think that, again, to your point, Carolina, the context, which I know came up earlier in our conversation, is so important, that when you have a community of people, not just learners, but also professionals who can all engage with one another and provide context to one another, you're going to develop a much more sophisticated understanding of these tools that you have at your disposal, not because they necessarily can solve all problems magically or mythically, but because you start to realize, okay, maybe this tool can be used in this way because not only have I experimented with it, but other people around me have shown me how this can be used effectively within a broader learning context, both theoretically, like you discussed, but also very much in and applied in the field theater as well.
Agreed.
Well, Corey, thank you very, very much for the conversation. I really enjoyed it. I'll say for myself, it was very enlightening too. So thank you for that.
Well, no problem. Yeah, anytime.
Thank you, Corey. Stay tuned, folks, for our next AI Byte companion podcast coming in a few months.